Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. David Nair, all the way from down under Brisbane, Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to the talk show that we're going to have this evening in Australia, afternoon in India, and whatever time zones you're working from. We have a great privilege today of having a lady by the name of Dr. Dornan, I should say, Dr. Dornan, an Order of Australia. Dr. Dornan started off her career as a speech pathologist, and through that process had been an extremely strong social entrepreneur, got into bionics, and through that process founded an organization called Hear and Say. She's the executive director of that organization, and subsequent to that founded an organization and chaired this organization of Bionics Queensland. It's an honor to actually be able to work with a person and have a discussion of the journey that she's gone through in relation to how we can help one sector of the community that are currently going through some challenges of hearing. I welcome Dr. Dornan on board. How are you?
Thank you. I'm very good, thank you. Very pleased to be here, David.
Fabulous. It's great to have you, Doctor. And I really want to journey through some of the things that you had shared with me prior to this telecast. One key thing that you mentioned to me was the Australian award that you received. Being a person that's heavily into coaching and transformational work for mindset, I'd like you to sort of share that aspect of it before we drill down into the other areas. What was your feeling? I mean, I know you journeyed through a lot, but what was your feeling when you actually received that Australia award?
Well, I was just totally delighted. I was on stage in the Brisbane City Hall, which is a very magnificent old building with a beautiful stage under a gorgeous atrium. And I was wearing Indian dress because it was an Indian function. And so I had on one of my beautiful saris that I bought. And I just couldn't believe it. So I was very, very honoured, I can tell you.
What was the significance of India there at that stage for an Australian award?
Well, there is a group called the Australia-India Business and Community group, and I was awarded Australia-India Business Community. I'm sorry, I'll start again. Australia-India Business and Community. That's still not right. Business and Community Person of the Year 2017. It was a business award. So I was really honoured to be winning a business award because I had never really considered myself as a business person before. Right.
It's amazing, isn't it, how things happen to you if you journey it through, right? And in this particular case, being a speech pathologist, did you ever envisage while you're going through uni that you would go to a place called India, work in India, and then be awarded something like this from an Indian environment of business?
I had never imagined it, David. I had always wanted to go to India. When I finally got to go with my husband as a tourist, I really fell in love with the country. I love the colours, the fabrics. I love the colours of the spices. I like all the markets, bazaars. I really enjoyed the sights. I did everything I possibly could do in India. I had a go at. So I really, really loved it.
Right. Dr. Dornan, drilling down, could you just share your part of your story coming through education, the norms of, I call it the process plant of a life in the early infant ages, coming through the university and then selecting a career. Where did you go from there? I mean, if we just share a little bit of that so the audience could get to know you better.
Yes, I'd love to tell you because I'd like to inspire young people today to consider an occupation like I have and a career like I have, because I guess it's not quite the normal path, but I was the oldest of 5 children. I had 3 sisters and a brother. So I was very, very young when I finished my final school year. I was only 16. I landed at the University of Queensland when I was 16, going on 17. And I found that I was a little fish in a very big sea, and I had to learn to swim because I'd come from a very small school, a little local
Right.
school. So I really worked hard at understanding life at university and trying to get to know people. The course that I decided on was I was the first person to enroll in it and the first person to graduate from it. It was a diploma in speech therapy at that stage, and that was more than 55 years ago. And I went through that course. It was a 3-year university course, and I'd always been used to working in a pioneer capacity where I had to do something that no one had done before, and I had to make it up as I went along. So going into speech pathology was like this. There were no textbooks. Of course, there was no internet at that stage. There was one lecturer, and we had courses with all of the medical and dental students. So we basically did part of a medical and dental degree with some psychology thrown in, and then specialist teaching on speech pathology from a very brilliant lady, Mrs. Elizabeth Usher. And I really, really enjoyed that very much. When I graduated from there, I was still very young, but I went into my first job at a hospital. I became the first full-time person at that hospital, and I worked across the whole hospital. And that was a great big learning experience for me. I was based in a geriatric ward, and I worked mostly with patients who'd had strokes and head injuries. But that was very important to my career, because what that did was it gave me the idea that the brain is the center for everything. And later on, when I got to do hearing, I realized that it was the brain that was the organ of hearing, not the ears. But to continue with my story, I became a first speech pathologist at another very big hospital, and so on throughout my career until about 15 years after graduation. I got the opportunity to work with children with hearing loss at a program for Education Queensland. I found that I didn't have enough time to see the children that I needed to see, but mostly their technology, their hearing technology, was not good enough for them to be able to learn to listen and speak if they had a severe, a profound, or a total hearing loss. And that distressed me greatly. So I decided to work out how to do things better. So the story continues from there. Would you like me to keep going?
No. That's fine for the time being. I'll interweave some other aspects of it as we journey through. Doctor, when we spoke, you shared your experience through that. You went into India. How did that opportunity open for you to look at how and what you could do in India?
It came about because, number one, because I love the country. But number two, I'd started in the meantime Hear and Say, a not-for-profit program for deaf children, which came off the back of the other program and me finding out how to do things better for deaf children. And when I had that opportunity, over a number of years, I actually worked up till 10 years in odd visits before I gained that award. And it was opportunity and a real need to help mothers of newborn babies who had children who weren't responding to sound.
And it must be extremely difficult for a mom not to know what to do and how to attend to things like that. Is there an opportunity in which that awareness could be broadened?
Yes, indeed. It's a case of being very perceptive, of noticing everything that the baby does with relation to sound. So it's a lot more than just snapping your fingers near their ears or trying to make a loud noise behind them. You really need to have their hearing, everybody needs to have their hearing professionally tested, because hearing loss can occur at a particular frequency, high sounds or low sounds, or it can occur for loud and soft sounds. So I really feel that a professional hearing test is really the only way to find out. But there are other little signs that you can look at, like the speech fails to develop, or they fail to turn if a plate's been dropped behind them, or they have difficulty understanding words against a noisy background. They have trouble hearing certain kinds of sounds. Certain kinds of sounds are produced indistinctly when they start to talk. They're often asking people to talk more slowly, more clearly, or more loudly, or turning up the volume of a television or radio. But basically, the main problem is that their brain is not being accessed by sound, which is the biggest problem of all.
Right. And at what age do you think this is the mom or the dad or even the brothers and sisters could diagnose this by visually looking at the child?
It usually takes quite a number of months without having that hearing test. So I think the important thing to know is, as soon as you know that a child's not responding as you would expect from a noise, or is failing to develop speech, is just not talking or talking very late, then it's urgent. It's a real emergency to get them in to get a hearing test.
Right. Doctor, how would you give a child, especially a deaf child here in this case, the best start to a life? How would you do that?
To give a child the best start, particularly if they were deaf, I think if you have a hearing test as early as possible in life, it's really important to be able to access their brain very early, because when babies are born with normal hearing, they already know a lot about hearing, because there's been some hearing in the mother's womb and they've learned how to hear, and they've developed the brain pathways for hearing in the listening part of the brain. When a baby is born with hearing loss, they don't have that brain area developed. It's just like a little rutted lane that has not been joined up. But what we want to do is to find out there's a problem, help them with some sort of hearing device, and then try and turn those little rutted lanes into 6-lane freeways.
Oh, right. And and in the course of doing that, you now are slowly exposing the child or the infant into some medium in which he or she could sensorily feel or hear that sound. Is that what you're saying?
If you can get the right hearing technology, you
Right.
don't need to feel, because
Okay.
but the technology for children with severe, profound, or total hearing losses is usually a cochlear implant or bionic ear. That can be very expensive, and it depends on whether the government is providing those for the children now. I haven't been back to India since 2017, so I'm not quite sure how far that's developed, but it's a very worthwhile thing for the country to aim at. But of course, the first thing is for the country to aim at newborn hearing screening for every baby. It's a very cheap test. In Australia, it costs about $25 for the test. But in a maternity hospital, it can be done very quickly in just a few minutes by a trained nurse or even a trained volunteer. So it's very quick, cheap and easy, as long as the hospital is on side.
Right, right. In your exposure in India, where you were, I'm led to believe, teaching or training people to diagnose this, so it could get into the market much stronger and people could then understand and feel the problems that are out there. What was your experience when you were sharing your thoughts as to their openness in accepting shifts and change? Were they open to that idea very easily?
Absolutely. because
Good.
hearing testing is, it involves a lot of technology. And I've
Right.
seen India and Indian people develop so quickly in their take-up of technology
Mm-hmm.
that the professionals that I was teaching and our team from here in Say were teaching in India were really, really interested. But what I think really needs to happen is for the government to pick it up, or districts to pick it up at grassroots level, so that babies are tested before they leave hospital if they're born in a hospital, or with their early vaccination. And that's a very good marker to put it with as well. Because what you can do is, if you have a child who's identified early, before their hearing peers are starting to develop speech and language and understanding for it, then you can actually have both a deaf baby and a baby with normal hearing progressing at very similar rates. That was my doctoral research, and I found that it is perfectly possible if you do everything correctly and in the right order.
And just so we can share some stories, could you enlighten the audience with a story or two in relation to how this was captured in India, and then how you were able to roll it out?
Right. Well, in India, the last time we went, we had people representing all areas of India, and they were flown by the government of India into Mumbai, and we went to one of the big centres in Mumbai, and what we did is we took a number of different classes, very intensive for 1 week, to help people to understand what that whole process is, to get the very best listening and speaking outcomes. And we found that the groups were extremely interested. So we're hoping that they went back to their own areas and started to teach some people around them in their own working environments as well.
To roll out the processes or the procedures that you've tried to instill with the core teachers, is that right?
Yes, but what we were teaching was not just newborn hearing screening. We were teaching the whole lifetime of teaching a child to listen and speak. And how we do that at Hear and Say is we partner with parents. So the type of approach we were teaching was auditory verbal therapy, where you teach both a parent and a child together at the same time. And that's really, really difficult. You teach a parent in one voice and you teach a child in another voice. And so we were teaching those approaches and what the actual topics are you would need to teach to a parent and child, to that full group of professionals who consisted of audiologists, teachers, linguists, speech therapists, speech pathologists, and so forth. So they were a very multidisciplinary group, but they picked it up very, very quickly and very easily.
When you mentioned adult voice and a child's voice, could you elaborate on that a bit, please?
Yes, to the parent. If I was teaching a parent and child with hearing loss, I would be speaking to the parent in a very nurturing sort of voice. Yes, you can do it. This is the way you do it. I'm going to show you. First of all, you do this. Now here's the toy. You practice with this toy. So that's a very nurturing, encouraging sort of voice. And for the child, I'd be speaking in what we call parentese, where you speak in a very sing-song voice. Here you are, baby. I'm going to give you this lovely ball to play with. Look at the ball. It goes round and round, round and round, and so forth. So, but each knows who you're teaching at the same time. And so this is the type of thing we'd be teaching. But we'd also be teaching the hierarchy or the step-by-step road to listening and speaking, in all different areas that the child must learn to function. So in listening, speech, language, communication, reading, writing, all those sorts of things. We have to teach the parents what comes first, what's the skill you build on, what comes next, and so forth.
That's interesting, Doctor, because earlier at the start of our conversation, you mentioned about the mind being the core of all of this. And now when you use a sing-song approach, you're actually trying to connect back cognitively to the child's mind. And when you're nurturing approach, you're cognitively trying to connect back to the parent's mind. So the absorption is at a greater rate. Am I right in assuming that?
You are very right. So what we're trying to do is to get the parent to communicate to the child in a way that's going to fast track or accelerate the development of their auditory brain pathways.
Right.
So by teaching them how to play with the child on particular topics with ordinary toys that you might have around the house or pick up on the street, then we're able to help them to accelerate that learning to listen, learning to understand, and learning to speak process.
Right. Let's scale up a little bit in the aspect of education system that is in place there. Is the current education system, do you feel, adequate to equip for such misnomers that are happening in the child's growth?
In India, do you mean?
Yes. First, let's start with India and then the rest of the world.
Right. For a start, I think that the training is in auditory verbal therapy is only being done by a few groups, but certainly it's part of a global group called the Alexander Graham Bell Association for Deaf and Hard of Hearing, based in Washington, D.C. And I sat on their board for many, many years, 9 years. I went over to Washington, D.C. and sat on their board. We have a number of great gurus who teach it all over the world. And I know in India, there are some very wonderful people who are trained in this approach. I always think of Jasper Chowdhury, who works for Cochlear, the Australian Cochlear Implant Company. And I know she's taught the most amazing number of professionals in a hub and spoke model where it's like a wheel, and then each person she teaches on that wheel goes out and trains another wheel of people, and that's how the message is slowly passing from person to person. Our intensive training was to try and fast track that process of training more professionals as well.
I must at this point emphasize a little thing, and I think you've been too humble in this, Dr. Dornan. It's a privilege and an honor to have someone who is a social entrepreneur like you, who has been to many other boards and at the same time worked in your own organization to get the bionics of cochlear hearing for the child. It's a great honor and tribute to have you here and actually get you to voice this concern out to the public so we can make sure that coming up generations would have a better lifestyle, so to speak, compared to what they had in the past.
It's my honor and pleasure to speak to the people of India.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. What are some of the warning signs that your child could portray when he or she is not able to hear? If you can just emphasize that. I want to bring that back to the parents' mind.
Yes, it depends on what age they are. So for very tiny babies, we would expect that at birth, that a baby with normal hearing would already be able to tell their mother's voice from their father's voice, would be able to tell high sounds from low sounds, would be able to tell their mother's favorite pop music, would be able to understand some of the emotion behind what's said, so fear or anxiety. And then as they start to learn what words mean, little bit by little bit, we'd expect at 3 months of age that they would start to identify their own name. And then at 6 months of age, they would be starting to be more attentive to sound and starting to perhaps look where the sound's being made from. Around 9 months of age, we would expect them to be able to say their first words. And around 18 months of age, we would expect them to be starting to put 2 words together, and so forth.
Right.
So,
Isn't that interesting? Isn't that
yes.
interesting? I mean, for you to, categorize that in that age groups that we're talking about, it suddenly trigged memory in my mind. And my daughter, Prashana, she'd never go to sleep. And at night we had to drive around with Richard Clayderman playing for her to go to sleep.
That's right. The children love music and love stories if they're born with normal hearing. But if they're not born with normal hearing, then once they're identified and have the right hearing technology on them, then they will start progressing the same as children with normal hearing, but delayed.
Right.
So that's why it's really important to identify them at the very earliest possible moment. Within a week of their birth is the gold standard. So the gold standard globally is to have a child's hearing loss identified by 1 month of age. By 2 months of age, we want their hearing aids or hearing device fitted. And by 3 months of age, we need them in an early intervention program. And by 6 months of age, if the hearing aids are not enough, excuse me, we want them, perhaps their parents, looking at a cochlear implant or a bionic ear, because that is probably the only way they're going to be able to speak clearly. And so that's why we really want the government of India to provide some funding for cochlear implants for very young babies.
Right. Doctor, when we were talking about you interacting and working with institutions, did you have an opportunity to merge your discussions with some of the, within the inverted commas, hierarchy of India to acknowledge the need and then to see what call of action you could put in place to cement that?
Yes, it's a very interesting story. In 2014, I met Mr. Narendra Modi at the G20 in Brisbane, and I had a very lovely conversation with him. I found out that he was very attuned to the needs of deaf children once he heard about how crucial it is. And I was very lucky that a lovely lady called Preeti Droza who was at Trade and Investment Queensland some years later, she moved back to India and she worked out a trip for me to visit numbers of different clinics and areas in India. And I also was able to link up with a gentleman who was a very honoured person in the government of India at the moment, Mr. Awanish Awasthi. I don't think he's still in that role, but he was the one who was able to bring us to India, but also I was able to get quite a lot of philanthropic funding to supplement what the government of India would pay for us for. So it was a really, really good story. And then I had made contacts before with different clinical groups in India, and they invited me to come and speak at their clinics. So Hear and Say paid for my trips to other centres outside or other cities outside of Mumbai, but in the main, 4 of us worked at the clinic in Mumbai and did the professional training intensively.
Right.
But I also went to Bangalore and down to Trivandrum and to Chennai.
Why Trivandrum? Personal reason.
Because there's a very good school down there called the National Institute of Speech and Hearing in Kerala.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And Samuel N. Matthew was the head at that stage. And I don't think he is anymore. And so we did quite a lot of work down there.
Fabulous, fabulous.
And then I went back a couple of other times.
Right, right. In the journey, now I'm asking, have you been able to implant, you're explaining a child, diagnosing a child as he or she grows at, week 1, a month and 2. Is there a checklist that's available at the by the pediatrician for the parent or the mother as she leaves out, for her to know this is what I need to look out for as my child grows? Is there some form of...
Yes, there's lots of different formats. You can find it on the net, or I can send you something
No, sorry, not for me personally, but I was wondering if that's a protocol, a process that's put in place for mums who are coming out of hospital to be aware. Because if we can diagnose it at an early age, the cure is better, I gather, than if we left it longer. Is that right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So if you look on the net under the stages of learning to listen, you'll probably find it. But there are quite a few around, and that the pediatrician should have something.
Sure. Because I thought, when we're doing a process rollout of trying to get parents consciously aware, number 1. Number 2, they have these little lists of things to be consciously aware. And this will be one of it. And in so doing, they're caring for the child, just like they know they have to feed the baby in certain measurements of, whatever food they have to take during the day. So I thought, the same thing would apply when it comes to hear, when it comes to sight, comes to feel, tactile, and all of those areas, the VAC, the visual auditory kinesthesia aspect of a child. Yes,
there certainly are. I could give you the ones that we use at Hear and Say, which is the centre that I developed. It's a not-for-profit centre. So, or you could look them up, I guess.
Sure. Are there any NGOs currently opened out to help in these areas?
In India?
Yeah.
Yes, there's quite a few. I know the Madras Ear Research Foundation in Chennai, the Esa Chandrasekhar Centre School in Bangalore, Cochlear, the makers of the cochlear implant or bionic ear, certainly the National Institute of Speech and Hearing in Kerala, and in Mumbai, AURED, AURED, is a good place to go to. So there's quite a few who are doing very well.
Right. I think probably as a flow on from here, and if there are queries coming through, I would direct them obviously to you and to Hear and Say, particularly your website. Your website is hearandsay.com, is that right?
It's www.hearandsay.com.au.
Yeah. So for the audience, whoever wants any queries or wanting to follow through on this, you're welcome to directly contact Dr. Dornan's team and have some help and support from there. Coming down on another area, Doctor, how do you think, what are the important ideas that we have developed in Australia in relation to the bionic ear that you feel would be rolled out within the next 5 to 10 years that could enhance hearing support and aid?
I believe that we've still got a few tweaks left with the hearing devices we use. There are a large number available now. There's not just a cochlear implant. There are other implants that are suitable for problems in other areas of the hearing tract. And a lot of progress is taking place in the form of teaching that we're using, the auditory verbal therapy as well. Excuse me a minute. I think I've got a dry throat.
Please take
Talking too much.
I'm so sorry to do this to you. I'll take a sip myself.
Sorry, everybody.
Okay? No, you're okay?
Yep.
Like a minute?
You can talk for a while.
Sure, I'll do that. The audience, let me just share with the audience how I got to meeting you. And it's only been a couple of months, and attending a seminar, like as usual, Dr. Dornan, talking at different venues. I was really, really taken by the work that she had done in India. And in so doing, I thought, it would be exceptionally good for us to showcase what can be done further in India based on a starting work that she had put in place, and especially with kids. And I have a very soft spot for that, because my work in India also took an area where infant mortality was addressed. And I know in South India they were very high, and some work that we did allowed foreign expatriates to come in and support training and teaching to enhance and upskill some of our people there, thereby reducing infant mortality. So when I heard Dr. Dornan looking at years, I said, we need to get Dr. Dornan's team and support and technology in India, that we can start working and helping out. And that's the reason why I honed in this particular area. This is to the audience. Once again, thank you so much for being able to have you here, Doctor. Yeah, as you're saying, the area that we could hone in on, what are some of those that we could work with?
Do you mean the other areas where our children are developing?
Yes.
Yes. Well, the most important thing is the way parents communicate with their children. It's very important to speak as if you're speaking not slowly, but in a normal voice to children, and using language that is long words, short words. It doesn't matter if they're very complicated words, but always by trying to talk to them so that they have the ability to understand, because you might have the object right there. So right. You might, but another important thing to do is, as you're moving around the house, you need to explain what's happening. So the first thing to do is to talk about what the child is doing. Oh, you're playing with the ball. You're bouncing the ball. You're doing a great job of bouncing that ball. Bounce, bounce, bounce. And talk to the child like a radio commentator, so that you're talking, making words about everything that they're doing, everything they're interested in. And then it's also important, if they're not doing anything, to talk about what you're doing yourself. So what the parent, the mother or the father's doing. And then so you could say, right, I'm going to put this spoon on the table, and this is your plate. Here we put them on the table, put down the spoon, put down the plate. Now I'm going to get you some food. Here we go. We'll take out some cereal, put the cereal into the plate. Let's pour milk on it, and so forth. So you're using that same radio commentator approach for everything, and you emphasize the key words that you want to teach. So if you know the child knows the word spoon but doesn't know the word plate, well, then you use the spoon several times but drop a plate in somewhere as well. So you've got both words going in, and eventually they'll very quickly pick up the meaning of those words.
Wow. Moving on in the area of how we can enhance, has any institution collaborated with yourself to see what you can roll out in India based on the current bionic technology that you have produced here in Australia and researched?
Yes, we've worked a little bit with the group in Chennai. We've worked a little bit with the group in Kerala. I've made lots of odd visits and spoken at conferences, and we really would like to take another team back and do another intensive training. But it's very hard to organise to get the funding to do that, to take so many people. We like to take 4. We like to take a speech pathologist, an audiologist, perhaps a teacher of the deaf, and maybe a backup person in case someone gets sick. And then we like to have those 4 people staying for just over a week so that we've got time to get there and do a full 5 days of training from early in the morning till quite, late in the afternoon. So it's hard to do that. I really would love some philanthropists from India to say they would help us to take a team to train people, or else they would sponsor some scholarships for Indian people who we could do an online course with and train them over the internet like we do to people all around the world. Here and Say has trained in 34 different countries.
Wow.
So lots and lots of countries we've worked in before. So we're quite used to working with interpreters, to working on training material that the professionals who are in that country request. It just depends on how it's possible to arrange it.
Right. And when you say your exposure is into 34 countries, you have an interpreter that would explain that, or would you have from Australia, or would you have an interpreter in the local country where you would train them first to connect with the local?
We've done it mostly the first way you said, where we've had somebody speaking. Just say we're doing it on the net, we'd have someone speaking in Australia on the net, and then we'd have somebody in India who was a local speaker but who had some knowledge of the topic.
Right.
I've also done it in Russia a number of times. I helped to be the first professional to take the cochlear implant into Russia, and I did it there with a week intensive. So I had to do all the lectures myself, but I had a Russian interpreter working with me all the time, and you knew to speak a little bit and then stop and let the interpreter go, and then you just kept going like that. And it's quite a nice way to work. I really like it. And in the end, you end up being able to understand a little bit of the language, and certainly to see the emotions that people are having, which gives you guidance about how to teach them.
That's a different reconditioning of ourselves on how we present something. So we need to pace our speech. And I recall this many times when I was in different countries, in Japan, for example, and China, where I did some programs. I had to pace it down such that the interpreter could keep up with me. If I ran it at the Australian rate of speech, it wasn't getting through at all. That was a challenge initially, but then I got used to it.
Oh, I'm sure you did. You're very professional, David.
Thank you. What's the biggest thing we can do to help the deaf children in India now?
The best thing that India can do is to do that newborn hearing screening, to roll it out in as many places as possible, to make it at no cost to parents so that they actually do it. And what that does is it levels the playing field for all children in their ability to learn to listen and speak. So as long as the child has normal thinking skills, they are able to catch up. If they are able to get screened, if they have a hearing loss, they need to be able to get hearing aids. And of course, that's another problem again too, the cost of the hearing aids. So the cost of hearing technology needs to come down. It needs to be much, much less for people in India, and then you need to try and find a professional who can guide and coach the parents to use this approach. And so there's still a few missing links in the puzzle, but all of those, the most important things are you have the early start through newborn hearing screening. That levels the playing field. You get the hearing devices that are best for that child fitted as early as possible. And then you teach the parents, or the parents themselves invent how to teach their children to listen and speak. Because learning to listen and talk happens by playing at home with someone who loves you.
Right.
And once you understand that, you're on your way.
Excellent, excellent. Doctor, if I can just move on into a different sector of this whole process. At the start, you spoke about the mind. And I'd like to sort of spend a few minutes in this area of the correlation or the synchronity between the mind and the ear. If you can just elaborate a little bit in that area so the audience could then get an understanding and grasp of it, how this whole thing fits in.
Yes, I always think of it as a lovely picture of an ear, someone's ear, and their brain, and then they're listening and talking. And as long as the ear is open and sound can get into the brain, so that's why the hearing technology fitted early is so important, then the brain pathways can get information from meaningful speech, make sense of it, learn to understand it, and the speaking follows automatically. So that's why the basic thing is allowing the sound to get to the brain. And to do that, we have to know early, we have to have a hearing device on the child's ear. And that way the brain is able to develop in a very normal way in the auditory areas.
Right. And is there any stimuli that we could put, not external stimuli, but conditioning stimuli of repeated things over and over again, such that this gets picked up at a faster pace?
The fastest way you can do this, because it's a very complicated process for the brain, is to have the parents to teach a child a word of vocabulary. Just say they were teaching the word wash, and they would set up a little scenario with toys and have a toy bath or a basin and some real water and something to wash the child with. And they would go through a whole series of games and play and demonstrate and talk all the while they're doing that. So they're repeating the wash word over and over in all sorts of different ways, and the brain picks it up.
Right. Wow. In summing up, if you could just condense everything that we spoke for the last 50 minutes into 3 or 4 steps that the mom or dad can be consciously aware, number one, and teenagers or even adults who are having this hearing aid issue can look at some means in which they can enhance their life till they can get the implants put in. What would it be? How would you put that through?
I would say if you have a hearing loss, find out about it early. Open up the pathway to the brain by having a hearing device fitted. Wear it all day long, 100% of your waking hours, and listen to as many different things as you can. Music, speech, TV, the radio, but it's much better to listen to parents because they will teach the child in just the right level, as naturally as can be.
I relate so much to your saying to us audience, listen to it as much as you can. It reminds me of a person who wants to exercise. Unless he does that stretching, it doesn't work. And the same thing I gather would happen here, because the inner ear and the outer ear and the middle ear is all muscle. So you need to keep stretching it. And the only way you can stretch it is by listening. I mean, I'm putting it very simply. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, because what you don't use in your brain, you lose. And so you don't want to lose the listening part of your brain. You want to keep it active for your whole life. Right.
Fabulous. Dr. Dimity Dornan, I truly am grateful and appreciate your time, effort in sharing, firstly, your knowledge and the advanced technology that you've developed to our community, and especially to a lot of the people that we are listening to us and our people in India. Truly grateful for that. And if you have any last parting words you'd like to share before I call it a day with this interview.
Well, I'll always say that it's the most wonderful gift that you can give a child, the gift of hearing, understanding, and speaking. And it can never be taken away from a child. So it's one of the most precious gifts of all, and what it means is the key to their future.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Dimity Dornan. I truly appreciate your time. You have a great evening. And audience, thank you so much for being online with us. Thank you so much, audience. And Dr. Dimity, once again, Dornan, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, and thanks for listening, everybody.